Hello and welcome to the Berean Bookclub podcast with your hosts Francois Poe and Conrad Rieder, the podcast where we discuss books written by saints both dead and alive to see what they can teach us and the church today and hopefully spur us on in our love for Christ. We're so glad you're joining us. Hello and welcome everyone to this month's episode of the Berean Bookclub. It is great to have you with us, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode as we just discuss this book by Trevin Wax called The Thrill of Orthodoxy. I chose this book specifically, as I said last month, because Strange New World, the first book that we looked at this year, really talks about how we invent ourselves, we express ourselves, and the Thrill of Orthodoxy starts to combat a bit of this. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Yeah. How are you doing, Conrad?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. This year, I've just noticed, this is, even though this is our second book, both of the books we've done have been pretty recent releases.
Yeah.
This book was released last year, 22, and Strange New World?
The beginning of 22, maybe end of 21.
Okay. We came across this book on TGC's book list at the end of last year for best books of, what's the list called? Best books of 22.
Yeah, Book Awards.
Book Awards.
But it came across on like lots of the Christian sites as one to read. So we felt we had to dig into it.
I had to give it a rest. And orthodoxy is a bit of a distant term. And so it's been a good read once again this month. Excited to chat about it.
Right. So let's dive into the book. As we come to the book, why do you think Trevin wrote this book at this time?
Yeah, I think Trevin's concern, or Trevin is in a way writing against guys who feel a little bit offstandish towards doctrine and dogma and orthodoxy, for a number of reasons. Folk who are a little bit like, the doctrine divides, let's not get caught up in the details, those kinds of sentiments. And he writes to say, this is actually it's a really an important thing. Let's not let it go just yet. In fact, he will argue that it's an adventure. It's a thrill to follow this road along with Christians for the last 2,000 years who have followed this road. It's thrilling. It's an adventure. And as he writes, he deals with a number of these kind of conjectures against the whole idea of being anti-dogma or being concerned about those things. But at the same time, he's able to be sympathetic to a lot of those concerns as well. Yeah. So it's really been a good read in that sense. He starts a book with this kind of picture of a castle. I'm going to read you a quote. He says, "Orthodoxy is an ancient castle with spacious rooms and vaulted ceilings and mysterious corridors, a vast expanse of practical wisdom handed down from our forefathers and mothers in the faith. Some inhabit the castle, but fail to sift through its treasures. Others believe the castle stands in the way of progress and should be torn down. A few believe the castle's outer shell can remain for aesthetic purposes, so long as the interior is gutted." And it's against folk who feel this way about this ancient castle of orthodoxy that he writes to say, it's a thrill, it's a thrilling adventure. Don't move past it. Don't want to break it down just yet.
Embrace the beauty of orthodoxy. I think it's a weird, it's almost a paradox for us, I think, in our day and age, to think of something so old, kind of doctrines that were established 2,000 years ago as being thrilling. And so maybe as we go through the book, we'll try and show how he truly makes his case that it is a thrilling right as you look at it. I enjoyed the way in which you also kind of interacted with church history, so that you got a bit of a sense of how has orthodoxy gone out into the world, and as the church has thought about how to speak well about God, and how we communicate that to as Christians and to the world.
He was quite good at that. He was quite good at. He reaches like really far back into dealing with kind of like forefathers and kind of debates and conversations that have happened way back. But he's really good at connecting to like modern ideas and modern battles of atheism and naturalism and all of those kinds of things as well.
Yes.
So he's been really expansive in the ground that he covers.
Yeah. As part of his task is to show that this is a story that started back then, but is continuing and will continue till the day that Christ comes back.
Yeah.
In the book, he speaks about kind of the way in which Orthodox Christianity comes into contact with the world, and that conflict is kind of inevitable. And then he goes on to speak about two different ways that we as Christians tend to deal with this conflict that we have with the world.
Yep.
What are those two ways that he speaks about?
Yeah. So, I mean, the point that he makes before he kind of moves into these two responses that Christians have, is just by recognizing that conflict is a normal part of life in this world, particularly when it comes to taking a stand on truth. When we say yes to something, we inevitably say no to other things. And in many ways, this comes perhaps off the back of some concerns against doctrine, that it just breeds infighting. When we stand on certain things to be true, we naturally say other things aren't true, and that just causes fighting. So let's just stop fighting. And he just makes a really good point that that shouldn't deter us necessarily. It's a normal part when we say yes to some things, we say no to other things. It doesn't necessarily mean that conflict has to be ugly. But it's there. It's a normal part of being there. We shouldn't be afraid of that. Sometimes, though, we are uncomfortable with that. And he says there's two ways in which we normally respond. Number one, accommodation, and number two, retreat. So the first way in which he says Christians sometimes respond is by feeling the need to accommodate the truth, to accommodate the world, to avoid some of that conflict. And so we kind of we want to buy their ear, right? And so we soften up on some things. We bring some things on board. We water down what we may believe to be true, what Scripture lays forth as being true. So that's the first way in which we would say compromise. He uses this picture of painting a wall at one point, where he's like, you've got a bucket of paint and you want to paint a wall, and that's going to cover the wall. When we accommodate, we water down that paint to make more paint so that we can cover more ground, be as accommodating as possible. But your end result is a very thin, watered down wall that's not really been covered well.
Yes.
The second response, which he speaks about, is through retreat. That we feel the need as Christians to preserve the purity entirely of what we believe, and so withdraw from the world entirely, to isolate ourselves, to exclude ourselves, and to do that for the express purpose of preserving our purity. And the point that he makes here, which is just really helpful, is that we can't, by doing that, we naturally forfeit our missionalness as Christians to exist in the world for the world. And so we're not actually preserving purity, because it won't be purity without mission.
Yes.
So you've excluded that aspect by your retreat.
Yeah, you miss the missional encounter that should happen as orthodoxy goes out.
Yes.
In your attempt to stay pure, and I thought that was very, very interesting, to recognize that our purity or our holiness is never in and of itself what we should strive for, but that holiness goes hand in hand with our pursuit of the nations to come before the Lord, you know, and know Him. And as we go out, those things have to go hand in hand. So what is kind of his answer to these two, the accommodation with a hope that they would give us their ear? So there's a true hope, or with the retreating, where that you just hope your purity will somehow show them that kind of this is the gospel. What is his answer to that?
The way that he answers it is, I think, by a quote from Augustine, against the world for the sake of the world. The point that he's trying to make is that we stand against the world out of love for the world, for the sake of the world. He's got a couple of examples in this chapter, but the one that he says is there's both what's the right word, prohibitions and
inhibitions.
I think those are both it.
I don't know.
But he uses this example of you say both to your son, you can play with a soccer ball in the garden, and you say to him at the same time, just don't run into the street with it, right? And both of those things you say because you love him.
Yes.
Both of those things you say because you're protecting him. Just because the one is negative and the one is positive, it doesn't nullify that. It's the same. It's the same reason we stand against the world on certain truths, on certain doctrines, that we stand firm there for the sake of the world, out of love. That acknowledging this to be true is best. This is how God has designed things and created
This is true.
things.
This is beautiful.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's the way in which he solves that tension, where you don't have to accommodate and you don't have to retreat. You're in the world and you stand against the world sometimes, but you do that for the sake of the world.
Yeah. And so actually at the heart of that, that's a posture towards the world with love, towards those who do not know Christ, but not love without truth. That they kind of like go hand in hand. One of the ways he then kind of moves on is how orthodoxy then influences all of our life.
Yeah.
And so he speaks about orthodoxy as a way of life. As he speaks about this, one of the things he deals with is this concept of deeds versus creeds that often gets brought up. Isn't following Jesus just doing the right thing, doing what Jesus did? And so don't get stuck up on doctrine. We'll leave that for the theologians. What is the answers that he kind of gives us, and how to answer that dilemma that we seem to face so often: deeds versus creeds, action versus
I think the clearest thing that he points out is that it's a false dichotomy. We can't separate those two ideas. The way we act is informed by what we believe to be true. And so it's unfair to kind of force someone to choose one. To say Jesus doesn't care about what you believe, only about how you live, or Jesus doesn't care about how you live, only about what you believe. In the Bible's mind, those two things are connected, and even in reality, we experience things to be that way. We do certain things, we act in a certain way because we believe certain things to be true. Whether those beliefs are right and wrong, we can talk about, and whether those actions are right and wrong, we can talk about. But essentially, our actions are connected to our beliefs. And so just at a level of how it plays out, it's not a choice between one thing here and one thing here. But in the Bible's mind, one thing flows from another. And so he would say it's unfair, I think, to ask someone to choose between doing one of those things. He's got a quote at one point. He says this: "The quest for knowledge is driven by the passion of love." And the point that he's trying to make is that one of the greatest expressions of love for someone is the quest of getting to know them, pursuing knowledge of them. And he brings the relational aspect of between us and God into the conversation here, where one of the ways in which you as a Christian love God as you work out and live out your relationship with him is by pursuing a knowledge of him. We were talking about this earlier, just about how this plays out with, say, like a husband and a wife.
Yeah, so I think I was telling Conrad how in the context of a relationship of a husband and wife, anyone from the outside would it would be very clear for them if I tell them, no, like, I love my wife, I love Jess, but I don't really want to get to know her. I don't want to listen to what she has to say. I love her the way I want to love her. That's not the way in which a relationship functions. If I truly love Jess, I'll listen to what she has to say. I'll honor her words and act accordingly in a certain sense. And that's between two equals. That's between me and my wife. And that's so much greater when it comes to us and God, the creator of heaven and earth, that has spoken. The arrogance that we have to presume to come to God on our terms and think that he acts the way we act is absurd on the one side. And we don't always see it in that light. But I think the contrast of that is the way in which we truly do honor God as God is saying, God, you have spoken. I will listen to what you have to say. I will submit under what you have revealed about yourself before I come to you and try and impose what I think you should do. And he deals with the humility that's required to take on orthodoxy as a way of life, to say, this is not my truth. This is a truth that has been spoken by God. And so I will submit under that. And so the beauty of all of this is actually when we rightly understand the pursuit of doctrine, pursuit of knowing God in the context of the relationship where God has not been silent, I think then it does create in us like a thrill and excitement, because now it's not like some of us do fall into the trap of doing. I pursue understanding these doctrines so I can look good in front of my Christian friends, or I can give answers to the world when they ask questions. The pursuit of knowing God is at the deepest level. I want to know the God that says he loves me. I want to pursue deeper communion with him. And our temptation is then to kind of like go somewhere else. Maybe I must just listen to the Spirit, or maybe I must go into nature and he's like, hey, I've spoken. Here it is. Pursue the way you pursue me is by getting to know what I have already revealed. And so I think that's a beautiful way in which he encourages us to say doctrine doesn't divide. It can divide if we pursue it with the wrong motivations. But at the core, doctrine is not something that's supposed to divide. It's actually supposed to breathe life into our relationship with God, because we come to know him for who he truly is. So what a glorious...
Isn't that thrilling?
I know. It's like I was speaking to another pastor, and he's like, no, I can't hear like the thrill of orthodoxy. Those things can't go together. And I said, I promise you, when I read this book, it really excited me to pursue knowing God, not for the sake of head knowledge, but because this is my God who has spoken. Amazing.
The quest for knowledge is driven by the passion of love.
Yeah. I think it's interesting the way in which he also just mentions how our world loves to lean towards pragmatism at the moment. And so we enjoy things that work. And so we pursue kind of like what works, what's efficient. So we have our marketing techniques at church. We have our ministry models that deal with stuff, and all those things are helpful. But it does lean towards what works. What are the actions? How many times have you been in a Bible study or in conversation with Christians, and they'd say, okay, but like practically, what does that mean practically?
What do I have to do?
What do I have to do? And of course, it's a desire. I want to do something for God, but the focus is there almost always like leaning on us and what we should do. And the first thing that God wants of us, fall on our knees and see him for who he is. And from a place of rightly knowing who he is, we can work and we'll do things for the Lord, but it's not about what we do for him. It's really recognizing him for who he is.
Yeah, and this is one of his concerns with the whole idea of, or with the sentiment that Jesus only kind of cares, wants me to live for him. It doesn't matter so much what I believe about him. His concern is that it does tend a little bit to be more of an action-driven relationship with God, which could possibly tend towards a more legalistic way of relating to God, that is only concerned about what you do, and not concerned so much about what you know about him, what you believe about him. And if you take into consideration what Wax is saying, that pursuing the knowledge of God is one of the ultimate expressions of loving, that makes so much more sense. That makes so much more sense.
And the way in which the Bible, then you start to see the link between those things. You start to see when the Bible speaks of the knowledge of God, we tend to automatically move towards knowledge of God and just like knowing. But when the Bible speaks of that, it's actually from a place of love, knowing God for who he is, works out in a changed life. Put on this, put off. I think that was a very helpful, very, very helpful truth to remember. And so if that's something that you are thinking about, take some time to read through the New Testament and see how knowledge is not pitted against kind of action. It's actually at the core of our faith is knowing our great God as an expression of our love for him. We've spoken a little bit now about why this one part is truly thrilling, the pursuit of knowing God. But he doesn't just deal with that. There's other ways in which he kind of reminds us of this thrilling pursuit of orthodoxy throughout the book. And so maybe just speak about why does he say, other than this pursuit of knowledge out of a passion of love for God, is orthodoxy thrilling?
I think the first thing that comes to mind, and he does touch on this in the book for sure, the world that we live in is all about kind of self-creation, making yourself, becoming who you are and being whatever you want to be. What he's calling you to in the book is something different. He's calling you to let something else mold and shape you. He's calling you to let something else make you into something, which may be the exact opposite of thrilling. It may very well be to some of us, but there's something about a truth that has stood the test of time, that's entirely outside of ourselves and entirely above ourselves, that God has this purpose of things unfolding in the world, and we get to tap into that. We get to be a part of that. If, he says, we would have the humility to submit to the authority of God and of the scriptures, and let ourselves be molded and shaped. There's something beautiful about that truth. This age-old truth has there's a beauty about being part of that adventure that thousands and thousands of Christians have been part of before us.
For sure. He has this quote that I'll quickly read for us that kind of summarizes this. He says, "The beating heart of orthodoxy is not a personal adventure of self-discovery, a patching together of our preferred versions of the Christian faith. It is the connection to saints in various cultures and climates, with different languages and traditions, all united by the common confession in Jesus Christ the King." And that summarizes that just like completely. And so that's beautiful. That truth is beautiful. one of the other ways he kind of talks about it is as orthodoxy, as we see actually him tracing history, orthodoxy, the right understanding of who God is as the churches learn to speak about God, then kind of that gospel message goes out into the world. Well, how does he speak about that sense of orthodoxy being thrilling?
Yeah, so and this is perhaps the most surprising part of the book for me, is he speaks about like the effect and the change that it brings about, not only at a personal level for you as an individual, as you allow who God is and how he's revealed himself to shape you and to trust him to do that, it changes you. It changes what you believe about him. It changes how you react towards him, and it changes how you live. If what you believe about him and your affection for him flows out in how we live and treat one another. So at a personal level, it's good. It brings about change. But as it goes out into the world over the centuries, it's done the exact same thing. As people come to see the goodness and the sweetness and the glory of God and what he is like and what he has done, how he's acted towards us, that same personal change kind of precipitates out.
Yes.
And just moves out and moves out and moves out. And so he makes this point that this truth, it's not only beautiful, but it's good. It's got a way of changing the world, which is an incredible thought.
Which is fascinating. And I think the way in which he contrasts it is the for instance, the concept of progressive Christianity is claiming to be on the forefront of kind of what God is doing right now. And it's thrilling because there's new things that we can think about, ways in which we can think about God, new ways to speak about God. And it's selling this version of Christianity that is new, that is exciting, that the world is going to accept. And he's contrasting that with saying, you know what's way, way more exciting than kind of like trying to invent this new Christianity is to see how the truth of the gospel, of what Christ did 2,000 years ago, goes into the world that you are living in right now. And where you least expect it, someone shares the gospel and this guy comes to faith. The gospel goes out, this Orthodox Christian faith that's so like traditional and kind of all the old school stuff that we think the world hates, it goes out and God uses it to change people's lives, uses it to change families, uses it to change churches, schools, countries. But ultimately God is using that to bring about his kingdom, which will fully come one day. But the exciting part of it is that we get a part we are part of that. We are given the task to say, go with this message, go out, share it with the world. And you don't know where God is working, but I promise you he's working.
Yeah.
And the thrilling part is to see how God uses this message in your life and in the people around you.
Yeah, that's the thrill. That's the adventure we get to be a part of. If we would let it.
Yeah. If we stick to the old truths and not try and like make a new Christianity. Let me end with just on this point, one of the quotes that he has. Too often people speak about orthodoxy or traditional Christianity as an impediment to progress. It is easy for some to imagine orthodoxy as regressive, an obstacle that slows down the church from being on the leading edge of societal development in morals and manners. But if we take a longer view of things, the opposite is true. The Orthodox are out in front because we are also behind. Orthodoxy is bigger than our era. The Spirit of God is before and after the spirit of the age. The progressives are those who will eventually be left behind. Wed the world and you will soon be widowed. What a quote, eh?
Goosebumps.
Yeah. It is fascinating. Maybe as we just come to a close, is there anything else in the book that stood out to you that you'd maybe want to?
I think just stepping back from the book, having read it and having talked about it, just often just helps you to have a little bit it's good to step back and be like, wow, what was actually good about that? I think it's just been really encouraging to keep pursuing knowing God more. That, I mean, yes, that's not exhaustive, but we can sometimes fall into the trap of feeling like we've arrived, and like we've spent the time in the difficult doctrines and so on. You know, now we're going to go about following Jesus. There's just something. There's a good reminder that as we follow Him, the greatest expression of love is pursuing knowing Him. Not for the sake of having nice things to say about Him or to answer people's questions, but to adore Him more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Cool. What a great book. I really enjoyed it. So we want to encourage you to go and pick it up. The Thrill of Orthodoxy by Trevin Wax. And be shaped by these truths that have come before us. One of the other books that I just want to recommend that I read this month is The Apostles' Creed by Albert Mohler.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I want to recommend that book specifically is it just gives you an outline of what are some of the core truths of orthodoxy. The Apostles' Creed has been used by churches everywhere for the past 2,000 years. And it's a good indication of what are the core truths of, I think, the very basic core truths of Christianity. And so, it's a book by Albert Mohler called The Apostles' Creed. So do pick that up if you are interested in finding out a little bit more about what is Orthodox Christianity.
What's next?
What's next? Songs of Suffering by
Joni or Johnny?
Erickson.
I think so.
Yeah. So next month it's going to be maybe a bit more heavy as we look at the topic of suffering. Do listen along with us. The joy that we have, or let me rephrase that, we have the opportunity, some of us, when we don't go through suffering, to think about suffering before it actually arrives, because it's way more difficult to deal with it once it's on your doorstep. So some of you may be going through suffering right now, and I'd encourage you to pick that up. But for the rest of you who are maybe feeling like, hey, everything's kind of going okay, sometimes it's really good to think about how we deal with suffering before it actually arrives, so that we can, in the moment, know where to turn to, have words to speak to God and to the people around us. And so, I do hope you listen to that with us, and we'll see you next month at the Berean Bookclub. Grace and peace, guys. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Berean Bookclub podcast. We'd love for you to head over to your podcasting app and give us a review and subscribe to the podcast. It will help us so much. This podcast was brought to you by BTI Stellenbosch. BTI Stellenbosch exists to bring theology to the church. If you want to find out more information, you can head over to btistellenbosch.com. Until next time.